Hey guys, Edward here from Edward79, the mixed content creator. Now, in my last video, I spoke about 12 of the European Union's 24 official languages, which is in part 1 of this two-part series about the languages of the EU. And so in this video, you guessed it, I'll be talking about the other 12 in part 2 of the official languages of the EU explained. So without further ado, let's get into the list. First up for part 2 is a language most of you probably don't know about, Irish. It's the official language of Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, and there's actually a pretty good, albeit kind of sad reason you probably don't know about it. And it all has to do with the Brits. The English invaded Ireland back in the late 12th century, and when it happened, English slowly took over as the dominant language, and very well is today, even decades after Irish independence from Britain. Unsurprisingly as such, Irish is not a very widely spoken language, with less than 1% of the EU's population speaking it, 1,873,997 of whom live in Ireland. And while that seems like a lot of people, that's only about 40% of the Irish population. Moving on from a sleeper language most people don't even know about to one of the most popular foreign languages here in the US. Next up we have Italian, which is the official language of Italy, officially known as the Republic of Italy or Italian Republic, and is official at a sub-national level in Slovenia and Croatia. Similar to many other languages in the EU, Italian doesn't have a large speaker base outside of Europe, with most all of the other Italian speakers not in Italy being in nearby countries, such as the microstates of San Marino and the Vatican, as well as the Italian-speaking parts of Switzerland. In the EU, however, the language is actually the fourth most spoken behind only French, German, and English, with 15% of the EU's population being Italian speakers, 58 million of whom are in Italy. Now onto a language that unfortunately doesn't really have that much to talk about, Latvian. It's the official language of the Republic of Latvia, or just Latvia for you normal people watching this. It's a Baltic language alongside Lithuanian, and while you'd think Estonian would be on here, I already cleared up in my last video that Estonian is in the Uralic language family alongside Hungarian and Finnish, but I digress. Latvian is also not that common, with less than 1% of the EU's population speaking Latvian, of whom 1.2 million live in Latvia. Now moving further south, but staying in the Baltic states, next up is Lithuanian, the official language of Lithuania, officially known as the Republic of Lithuania, and official at a sub-national level in Poland. Similar to Latvian, there isn't much to talk about, as it doesn't really have very much influence outside of Lithuania. But like I said earlier, it's a sister language to Latvian, with both being Baltic language, rather obviously excluding Estonian, like I said, when I talked about Latvian, because I'll say it again, Estonian is an Uralic language, not a Baltic one. Lithuanian is actually more common than both Estonian and Latvian, with roughly 1% of the EU's population speaking the language, 2.8 million of whom are in Lithuania. And yet another very restrictive language on this list, Maltese is the official language of the Republic of Malta, or just Malta, in which you might remember that English is also an official language there, from part 1, and it is. But what's really intriguing is that despite being right next to Italy, Maltese isn't a Romance language, instead being in the Semitic language family. which in terms of language families actually makes Maltese closer to Arabic than to Italian, making it one of only 4 languages in the EU that aren't Indo-European, with the other 3 being Estonian, Hungarian, and Finnish. Maltese is probably the least spoken language in the EU, with less than 1% of the EU's population speaking it, and Malta only having 450,000 speakers. Next in line for this video is Polish, the official language of Poland, officially known as the Republic of Poland. Now, when I talked about Czech back in part 1, I mentioned that Czech is a West Slavic language, with the language branch having 2 other languages that would be mentioned here. And yes, if you remember from last week's video, Polish was one of them. As well as that, I mentioned one other language that will also appear on this video. Polish is the 6th most spoken language in the European Union, as Polish is spoken by roughly 10% of the EU's population, 38 million of whom live in Poland. Heading both west and south for this next one, next up is Portuguese, the official language of Portugal, which is officially known as the Portuguese Republic. It seems very similar to Spanish, and rightfully so, as Spanish and Portuguese are very close cousins, with both languages falling under the Romance language family alongside French, Romanian, Italian, and the lesser recognized Iberian languages. And yes, most Portuguese speakers live outside of Europe, with Brazil alone having a whopping 205 million of them, more than 10 times Portugal's count. That said, Portuguese speakers still make up around 3% of the EU's population, with Portugal counting for about 10 million of them. Now heading east all the way to the Balkans, next up is Romanian, the official language of Romania, officially known as well, I couldn't actually find the official name, so I'll just leave it at Romania. Like I said in my top 10 easiest languages for English speakers video, link in the description below, Romanian is surprisingly easy for sounding so exotic. Although this is because, again, Romanian shares close ties to Spanish, French, Italian, and Portuguese. Romanian is spoken by 6% of the EU's population, of whom Romania is home to 16.19 million of them. Next up, it's back up north, as next up is Slovak, the official language of the Slovak Republic, or Slovakia for you normal people watching, and being official at a sub-national level in Hungary and the Czech Republic. Now, when I spoke about Polish earlier in this video, I mentioned there'd be one more language in the West Slavic branch that's official in the EU, and Slovak is exactly what I was talking about, with the only actual South Slavic language in this video coming not that much later, actually. Slovak speakers make up about 2% of the EU's population, with 4.65 million of them in Slovakia, 200,000 of them in the Czech Republic, and 5.1 thousand of them in Hungary. Earlier on, I mentioned that only one language in the South Slavic branch would appear in this video, and Slovene, also known as Slovenian, is exactly what I was talking about, which is the official language of Slovenia, officially the Republic of Slovenia. Similar to the West Slavic languages, Slovene refuses to use the Cyrillic alphabet, instead basing their alphabet on the Latin one used in many Western European languages. Slovene is even less common in the EU than Slovak, with less than 1% of the European Union's population being composed of Slovenian speakers, of whom 1.92 million live in Slovenia. And yet another language with a gigantic non-European speaker base. Next up is Spanish, the official language of the Kingdom of Spain, or just Spain. Like I said before, Spanish has a huge speaker base outside of Europe, with Mexico having the largest Spanish-speaking population, followed by the US in second place and Colombia in third, with Spain only having the fourth largest Spanish-speaking population in the world. And as for why the US is so high, I'd assume it's from a combination of 1. The US has a much larger population than Spain, and 2. Recent influxes of, let's just say, undocumented migrants from Latin America into the US. Even back in Europe, however, Spanish speakers make up 17% of the EU's population, 4.8 million of whom live in Spain. Last, but certainly not least, we have Swedish, the official language of the Kingdom of Sweden and Republic of Finland, or just Sweden and Finland. It's very similar to Norwegian and Danish, and while I mentioned Danish in part 1, I didn't mention Norwegian once, because it isn't one of the EU's official languages. But I digress. The language has very close ties to the other Nordic languages, as Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and Icelandic are all in the North Germanic language branch. And yeah, sorry Finland, but Finnish is an Uralic language, not a Germanic one. Swedish is spoken by around 3% of the EU's population, of whom Sweden has 9.39 million of them, and Finland has 289,000. So there you have it, part 2 of the official languages of the EU explained. We hope you enjoyed this video. As always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!